It's just afternoon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, The Why of Executive Coaching, presented by Wayne Scott. My name is Maggie Marathi, and I'm the Assistant Director for Career Programs here at the Alumni Association. Our office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and to support the alumni community with career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. It's my privilege to introduce you to our presenter today, UChicago alumnus Wayne Scott. For the past 8 years, Wayne has led leadership, development, and coaching programs for Multnomah County, Oregon. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the University of Chicago Magazine, the Oregonian, Salon, and the Psychotherapy Networker. His short article, The Scary Things That Can Make You a Stronger Leader, appeared recently in Governing. He has a Master's of Arts in Clinical Social Work and a Bachelor of Arts in the Humanities from the University of Chicago, as well as a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the American University. Today's webinar will focus on the why of executive coaching, especially as it applies to mid-career and seasoned leaders. Wayne will address how organizations nurture and sustain leaders who are organizationally savvy, emotionally astute, and visionary, as well as how coaches help create capacity for systems thinking, the ability to tolerate ambiguity, and what is referred to as adaptive leadership. Now, let's get to the reason you've all joined today, and let me welcome Wayne.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about executive coaching. This is an exciting topic for me, and it's one that I believe is very important for organizational health, productivity, and innovation. I want to start by saying a word about the organization where I work. They've been really generous in allowing me some time to present this webinar. Multnomah County is a regional government. It's the smallest county in the state of Oregon, but it's the most populous and the most diverse. It's primarily known as the region where Portland resides. Portland is best known for the television show Portlandia, which very few Portlanders actually watch, not because it isn't funny, but because it hits a little bit too close to home for us. We're also the city where the creators of The Simpsons grew up, and many of the characters in that television show are named after streets and landmarks in our city. Multnomah County, where I work, is an organization of about 5,000 employees, and we're in 9 different lines of business, including public health, human services, public safety, libraries, animal services, roads and bridges. We're all over the board. And like many organizations, we're hit hard by the wave of retiring baby boomers. In the past few years, as the economy has bounced back, we've invested pretty heavily and progressively in workforce development and succession planning. And that's where a lot of my experience as an executive coach comes from. I want to own a couple key influences that inform my perspective on executive coaching. First of all, I'm a family therapist by training and by experience, as well as a program administrator of mental health and addiction treatment programs. And I'm going to say a little bit about how I got into this line of work in a minute. A lot of the tools and training that I use are based on the Center for Creative Leadership, which is a well-known international clearinghouse on leadership development. And as Maggie said, for the past 8 years, I've run coaching and leadership development programs in the public sector. One of the most powerful influences on my philosophy of executive coaching was my own experience being coached. 8 years ago, I made a dramatic career change, and I went into the field of organizational development. As a former therapist and a program administrator, I had transferable skills that made it look like I could probably do the job, but it was a new field to me, a big, complex political organization, and there was a lot of uncertainty and tumult to navigate. And frankly, on that first day when I showed up, it was overwhelming. Quickly, I got recommendations for executive coaches who could help me grow into this new role, not to mention manage my anxiety. Over the course of my first 2 years on the job, I met Guadalupe. She was a senior consultant in a local consulting group. She's since retired, and this is a picture from her retirement party. We met regularly for a while, and then more ad hoc as I faced new challenges on the job. In addition to listening to me, and sharing her formidable experience, she linked me with mentors who worked locally, many of whom are still active parts of my professional network, and I'm going to talk about mentors in a little while. We're going to start, though, with a quick poll. I'd like to hear from folks who are participating today, where you're coming from, what kind of organization you work in, and what kind of familiarity you have with executive coaching.
So we've had some great participation on this poll, Wayne. This is Maggie from the Alumni Association jumping in. It looks like about 50% of our attendees today are at a private sector or corporation, and about 30% are entrepreneurs or independent consultants, and then a good mix, about 10 or 15% each for nonprofit organizations and the public sector.
Excellent. And what do we know about their familiarity with executive coaching?
And I just launched that poll, so if everybody could go ahead and chime in with their familiarity, I'll give you those numbers in just a moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie.
Mm-hmm. It looks like the majority of our attendees here, right about 50%, are curious about coaching. And then we have a pretty even split between our other answers. What's an executive coach? I need an executive coach. I have been coached, and I am an executive coach.
Excellent. All right, that sounds wonderful. And I think that based on the content I've got today, we'll be able to sort of speak to that curiosity and provide a really good overview. That's wonderful. Since we've only got less than an hour together at this point, I'm going to flag a number of resources for folks as I talk about different topics so that you can do further reading or watch online videos and that kind of thing. The first resource actually relates to the title of the workshop, the webinar, The Why of Executive Coaching. I've modeled the design of this webinar on Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, which he describes in his book, Start With Why. There's also a pithy TED Talk he did about his framework, which has gotten like a bazillion hits. Sinek's point is that too often organizations talk about the why and the how of their operations, the nuts and bolts stuff, but they neglect the more overarching and inspiring concept of why we do what we do. What's the bigger existential purpose? How do we communicate that to others? The why of executive coaching is important because coaching generally still has a public relations problem. There's a terrible lingering perception out there. Managers and senior executives who seek coaching are perceived to have problems. They need quote-unquote organizational therapy to be more effective leaders. There's a little bit of truth to this. You know, as somebody who does coaching, I can affirm that some people who are referred to a coach struggle with some pretty serious performance issues as leaders. But there are many other reasons for leaders to engage an executive coach. So I'm going to talk about the what, the how, and the why of executive coaching. I want to start with a definition. Coaching is one of those words that is bandied about in a lot of different settings and contexts these days, so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. A couple of years ago, Atul Gawande wrote a wonderful essay in The New Yorker called Personal Best. Gawande had been a surgeon for 8 years, and he had impressive successes to show for it. His number of successful operations matched or beat the national average for folks in his profession. But at age 45, he hit a plateau. Nothing got bad, but he stopped getting better at his job. He knew from his experience improving his tennis game that in sports, a coach helped you improve your game. And in fact, professional athletes and even musicians always have a coach working with them no matter what stage they're at in their career. Gawande engaged a retired senior surgeon to come and observe him in the operating room and give him feedback. And he found that even though he had acceptable surgical results, his game started to improve again. Coaching is something that happens all the time in different implicit and explicit ways. It's an activity. So our bosses and coworkers can provide informal ad hoc coaching on our performance, and that's great. But there's something special and unique about a coach who has that duty as their formal role in someone's life. The coach is neutral. They have expertise. They are not going to do your performance appraisal. They are hopefully not vulnerable to office politics or competitions or dynamics. A good coach allows the coachee to be vulnerable within a confidential, trusting environment. We know from the new neuroscience that status differentials within the workplace, by their very nature, cause us stress and activate certain self-protective defenses that can block learning and growth. So the coach, as someone who's outside the work setting, it has a certain immunity to that. So executive coaching is one flavor of coaching that's distinguished by the place in the organizational hierarchy of the person receiving the coaching. Executives face brain-staggering, multi-dimensional challenges, and they need to take calculated risks to enable their organizations to adapt. Coaching ensures that they act and make decisions that are thoughtful and sound within an environment that is complex and ambiguous. So here we have Portlandia, one of our famous statues here in Portland, Oregon, inviting us to take another poll. I've given you a basic definition of what executive coaching is. I want to open the line up for folks to submit any questions they have about coaching. And you can use the question box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. You can submit those anytime throughout the webinar, and I'm going to get to as many of them as I can when I get to the last part. So that gives you an idea of what coaching is, what kind of definition that I'm working with. Now I want to talk to you about the how of executive coaching. How do good executives get there? So I'm going to tell you a little story. A while back, I had the good fortune of coaching a manager in information technology, which isn't a field where I would claim any great expertise. This gentleman, he didn't have any performance problems per se. He just wanted to grow professionally as somebody who managed a large, diverse group of people in multiple sites. And as we were wrapping up our work together, I asked, how would he describe coaching to someone who didn't know what it was? It's kind of like a rubber duck, he said. This is an informal term in computer programming, I have learned. A programmer will carry around a rubber duck and debug their code by forcing themselves to explain it line by line to the duck. It's not uncommon after talking through a tangled programming problem with this inanimate object that a programmer can come up with a solution. I was very humbled by this comparison, but eventually I got it. A lot of what I do as a coach is I just listen. The time I have together with my coachees is a time when I create a speed bump in their busy, chaotic days where they can slow down and reflect and use their best critical thinking to puzzle over big challenges. If you want to know more about the rubber duck, as I did, rubber duck debugging, you can go to Wikipedia. You'll be surprised at how much information there is on that one. Some researchers at the Center for Creative Leadership asked well-regarded CEOs what factors most contributed to their growth and success as leaders. And their responses were very surprising, at least they were to me. The lion's share of folks identified being thrust into big, overwhelming challenges as one of the key drivers of organizational growth, followed by having role models to emulate, and then less significantly by books and other traditional forms of learning. This, again, was very humbling to me as somebody who teaches for a living. But I think one of the things we want to underscore here is that the lessons learned on the job had the most impact for professional growth. Executive coaching capitalizes on this insight and provides intervention and attention in three main areas. I've talked already about the importance of having challenges, and I'm really talking big challenges, challenges that keep us up at night, stuff that makes our heads hurt. Executive coaching provides a rich opportunity for applied learning on the job, the growth of practical wisdom. It compels executives to slow down and distill insight from their efforts to face these difficult challenges. It invites them to get out of a more reactive or defensive mode that can be our human default when we're under stress. Assessments are important to the process because they yield accurate information that helps the process. The team of folks that I work with, we use assessment instruments that are developed by the Center for Creative Leadership. And I'm not here to sell that organization's instruments because I know there are a lot of reputable 360s out there. But I do want to share what I appreciate about the tools we use. They're research-based. They are empirically validated. They focus on key competency areas that we know are relevant for leadership success, and they are very specific and behavioral in their focus. So they provide less room for subjective interpretation. I have a lot of experience with 360s, good 360s, and also bad 360s that are produced by other organizations and consultants. But I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm going to allow that if you guys who are listening want to hear more information about 360s, you can just send me in some questions and I'll talk more about that at the end. An important part of the assessment, really the first thing a good executive coach does after that assessment, is to help the executive make sense of it. So to interpret the data they receive and create what I call a developmental plan. 360 evaluations can yield an avalanche of data, but effective executive coaching demands a focus. What's important to focus on right now for this executive? So developmental planning is key. Support comes in other forms as well. If you're going to ask a leader to go through a stressful, challenging experience, you've got to give them support in addition to what the coach offers. And that support can take a number of different forms, mentors, fellow travelers, and other folks who are within their environment who might be able to participate in feedback loops about their performance. One of the things I coach folks on is asking others for support in their professional growth. So that is, building feedback loops around specific leadership behaviors within the workplace. It's a very potent source of learning for the executive. And the other cool thing is it also provides highly visible role modeling for other people in the same organization. It creates permission for everybody to take risks, to learn, to grow professionally. What you see here is the definition of mentoring. I'm going to go back to the experience I had with my coach, Guadalupe. On that first meeting that I had with her, she asked me about my concerns, and she listed out probably 10 major areas where I needed help from her. And what she said to me is, she said, I can help you with about 6 of these areas, but these other 4, I'm not the right person. So she went through her Rolodex. She actually had a Rolodex, and she facilitated connections for me with 3 or 4 different mentors in my community, and those became people who were incredible resources to me, and still are actually to this day. I'm a huge believer in mentoring. I think we're going to do another poll at this point and just ask folks who are participating about their organization's experience with mentoring, and I'm going to leave a few minutes, a minute or so for that.
So I launched the first poll here, Wayne. Does your organization have a formal mentoring program? And we've gotten a good response rate here. It looks like about 70% of attendees are reporting that no, their organizations do not. About 25% are saying yes, they do, and the rest are unsure. So about 5 or 6% there are unsure.
And that's not surprising to me at all. I think formal mentoring programs are largely considered something of a luxury. But my experience, interestingly, we have a formal mentoring program where I work, and it's one of the things that surprised me once we started our mentoring program is that it wasn't just beneficial for the employees who were being mentored. It engaged them, it vitalized them. They felt like the organization was invested in their career, but another surprise was for the person who was the mentor, it had something of the same impact. They felt honored to be asked to mentor. They were also vitalized. It was actually one of the easiest things they did in their day, getting together with their mentee. They were flattered to be able to offer their experience, their wisdom, and their savvy. Why don't we get to the second poll about informal ad hoc mentoring?
Went ahead and launched that there for our attendees and record in just about a minute here. Great. Looks like we have a pretty good response rate on this one as well. So does your organization support informal ad hoc mentoring? We have about 50% of attendees saying yes, 30% or so saying no, and another 25% or so saying they're unsure.
Okay, that's great. It's and that's consistent with my experience. I think that there are certain leaders who are extraordinary assets for any organization who just very naturally offer to mentor emerging leaders, people they see as stars, seasoned leaders, people that they're trying to grow into mission-critical, high-level positions within their organization. One thing I want to say, and it's just kind of my pitch for formal mentoring programs, is that when we are working within a diverse organization that has folks from many different cultural backgrounds, I think it's important to have a formal mentoring program where the organization actually structures and brokers the relationships. Not everybody coming from all cultural groups feels that they are entitled to or allowed to ask for mentoring, even though we know it's an extraordinary support to folks as they are developing and taking their careers to the next level. And I think that's one important way in which organizations can ensure equity of this important benefit. So I just want to kind of put that out there. It doesn't take long to do a mentoring program. We keep a database in my organization of all of the folks who are interested in mentoring and the specific areas in which they feel competent, where they feel like they've got some good competence that they can share, things like project management, dealing with problem employees, that kind of thing, and then we're able to broker those relationships. You know, there's so much I think that that we could say about mentoring. There's so much more discussion to have. It's such an important issue and such a nice complement to any kind of coaching relationship that I'm going to invite folks who are participating today to continue this discussion about mentoring through LinkedIn. And I think you're going to get a link to that after the webinar. Is that right, Maggie?
Yep, that's correct. So in your follow-up email today, you'll receive a recording of the webinar as well as a link to the discussion that will start on LinkedIn to chime in a little bit more on your thoughts on mentoring in the workplace.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to that. I am a big fan of LinkedIn, and I'm a big fan of getting more and more folks to maximize all the rich resources that it offers to us, especially regarding professional growth. So I'm actually doing what Simon Sinek said not to do. He said start with why. I'm actually ending with why, so I don't have to do what Simon Sinek says. He's not my boss. But I am going to talk about why now. One of the most influential books I've read in the last few years is The Practice of Adaptive Leadership by Heifetz, Grishow, and Linsky, because it lays out a framework for thinking about organizational change and adaptation and the leader's role in facilitating it. Executive coaches can help leaders to get on the balcony, that is, to take a long view of their organization's challenges, to stay thoughtful and to persevere, and to look at themselves and their role in either constraining or facilitating large systemic change. Economic and political uncertainty, increasing globalization, geographically dispersed teams, rapidly changing technologies are just a few of the factors that create an organizational and world climate of uncertainty, ambiguity, turbulence, complexity, where the path of organizational adaptation is not always visible or sure. And this is why folks in executive positions have to be comfortable taking risks. They have to go out there and maybe not feeling like they've got complete information or 100% confidence in what they're needing to do. The challenges that leaders face are fierce, and it's tempting to present oneself as invulnerable. Standing alone, being the giant on whose shoulders everyone stands is a dangerous, dangerous myth. In fact, the best leaders need connection, where they can share appropriately, reflect critically on the challenges that they face, build self-awareness to make sound choices for taking risks and moving forward. So within the time constraints we've had today, we've covered a lot of ground about the what, the how, and the why of executive coaching. And of course, a lot of things have been left out. I want to make some time now to hear what questions have come in during the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Wayne.
And I believe, too, that people can...
We have had quite a few questions come in, and just as a reminder, if you still have more questions, please feel free to submit those through the questions box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar dashboard. Wayne, does it sound good if I start posing a few of these to you then?
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay, perfect. So one of the main themes kind of throughout the questions that we've received is about finding and evaluating an executive coach. Are there certain criteria that you would recommend? Are there certain certifications that you should look for? What's the best way to figure out if this is going to be a beneficial relationship for you and the coach?
Great. So there are two different kinds of coaches. I was at a conference on executive coaching a couple years ago, and they did a poll with all of the participating organizations, and one of the questions they asked is how many organizations have formal internal coaching programs where you actually have the coaches on staff. They're in this, in the same buildings as the people who work there, and then external coaches. And about, I would say, well over half of the organizations had formal coaching programs, within their organization. So internal coaches, obviously, with internal coaches, these are folks who the organization can ensure that they have the appropriate training and experience to do the job. There are a number of different organizations out there that provide training in coaching and executive coaching. That lay out the competencies that are important for a coach to have. In terms of external coaches, people who are outside the organization, most organizations, in my experience, use a mix of internal and external coaches. There are, for some sensitive situations in an organization, it's not appropriate or comfortable for an executive or a leader to use someone who's internal to the organization. It compromises the integrity of the coaching experience, and so it's important to go with someone who's external to the organization. I know in my organization, it has been really, really helpful to have a dozen or so consultants who are external, who are familiar with the public sector, because that's where I work, who are familiar with government, because that's also where I work, who know the political climate in our neck of the woods, and also have good skills as a coach. Purely from my own anecdotal experience, it's helpful to have a coach who has been in leadership positions themselves. They have managed large operations. They're familiar with the operational reality of trying to get an organization to work effectively. I think that is a really helpful thing, in addition to having some additional academic knowledge. One of the most potent factors in a coaching relationship is the quality of the relationship. And that's one of those things that's very difficult to, that the only way you can evaluate that is just to personally meet with the coach and see and feel, is this somebody that I feel comfortable with? Is this somebody with whom I feel like I can really talk about what's going on, really be vulnerable? You want to have an absolute reassurance that it is confidential. That is, I think, huge. You really want to create an environment where someone can share what's going on, especially share the things where maybe they feel like they've made mistakes, or they haven't made the best choices, and they need to retrospectively review that, to get the learning from it. There are coaching certification programs out there, and I actually have to be honest with you, I have not studied them really closely. I would say the lion's share of folks that I'm working with who are consultants who do coaching, who are external to my organization, do not have certification through a formal coaching organization. They're people who sort of they're seasoned, they're senior in their careers. They do have some additional training in how to be a coach, but the big thing that they bring to the relationship is the depth of their experience in the field that they're in. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's great, and hopefully that answers that question for everybody. The next question I have here came in, and I think this is really interesting, and I'll go ahead and read it pretty verbatim from what was submitted. Do you have a recommendation for the type of language you would use organizationally or organization-wide to destigmatize the idea that executives who need coaching are actually failing? How do you overcome that kind of stigma and present to your organization that this is really to help enhance their leadership abilities, not necessarily that they're failing?
Wow. That is the right question to ask. It's huge. And again, it's, in my experience, some percentage of the folks who either self-refer or are referred for executive coaching, they are being referred because there are some performance issues, right? They have competency in many areas, but there are some key areas in which they're causing harm to the organization. They're not they're not navigating the workplace well. So when I can just share my own personal experience here. When I was starting a formal coaching program in the organization where I work, one of the things I did, so I guess this is a kind of an organizational secret that I'm revealing here. I went to some key leaders who were very visible within the organization, people that I thought might be open to doing this, and I asked them to sign up for our coaching program. And I asked them not only to sign up for our coaching program, I said, will you sign up for the coaching program, and will you let everybody in your team, in your division, in your department know that you're doing this? What this did is it created a very important role modeling within the organization, where one of the things that's amazing about being in a leadership position is the high visibility of it. People are watching you all the time, and so when somebody says, I'm going to sign up for the coaching program, I'm going to do a 360 evaluation, I want to hear what people have to say about how I'm performing. I mean, that's a culture shifting moment in an organization. And I think it really, you can start to see how that shifts thing. It creates kind of a permission to do it. I have one director of a department where I work who, when he and I talked about this, he not only decided that he was going to go through a 360 process himself and go through a coaching process, but he asked every executive in his department to go through it too. So they actually all went through it at the same time. And boy, did that create a very positive cultural ripple effect within their organization. I think it made them a lot stronger. It showed them that their leaders were going to fearlessly confront their own, the places where they get stuck in their career. That they weren't going to shy away from that. They weren't going to be defended. They weren't going to pretend that they didn't make mistakes. They were going to actively ask for feedback. One of the interesting things about the particular 360 instrument that we use is that it requires the person who's being evaluated to invite raters to comment on their performance, to give them ratings in 16 different competency areas. So, somebody who's in a leadership position may be sending out a 360 evaluation request to 40 people within the organization, people who are senior to them, their peers, their direct reports, people who are in the community or outside the organization. And so again, you've got that really powerful, positive cultural ripple effect of a leader fearlessly saying, I'm looking at myself. I'm looking at how I can improve. And it makes it, I think it makes it sexy. It makes it something that is desirable and interesting for people to do.
I think that's great. In your response there, you mentioned that sometimes people are self-referred to kind of executive coaching, either internal to their organization or to find an external executive coach. Can you talk about how you know it's time? Is it when you face particular challenges at work, or are there other tools, maybe prior to taking a 360 assessment, that people can use to determine if they are sort of in the right place in their career for executive coaching?
I'm just making a couple notes here so I track the whole question. So I can talk about a couple different ways in which it's time, or it's a good time for executive coaching. Maybe I'll share just from my own personal experience first. I've been with the organization that I've been with in a couple different positions for 15 years. In those 15 years, I have had 5 360-degree evaluations, and I usually had it either before I was leaving a job, or after I'd been in a job for a year, or when I was trying to take my own leadership to a different level. And every single time that I went through the process, it jump-started my own professional growth. It kind of forced me to look at aspects of my performance that I wasn't aware of, things that I was unconscious of, things that other people saw that I didn't see. I think the one thing that you really want to sort of keep in mind about 360 evaluations is they don't just give information about one's deficits or the areas where one struggles. They also give an abundant amount of information about where someone is strong and successful and resilient. And that's really, really helpful, affirming information to get as well. I've worked with coachees who came to me or came for executive coaching when they were facing particular daunting challenges. So these are people who were already perceived to be competent, smart, effective leaders, but who were being put into really daunting, overwhelming situations where the answer wasn't necessarily clear. There wasn't a clear technical solution to what they were being faced with. They had to kind of dive in and figure their way out. I think that is a wonderful time to connect with an executive coach who can kind of provide reflective time, so, where people can reflect on what they're going through and what the best course of action is. When we as human beings are under inordinate stress, we are vulnerable to defaulting to reactive and defensive positions to protect ourselves or to help to manage internal stress, which is not good for the organization, is not good for decision making or taking prudent action. And so that's another reason why it actually is it's a good time investment to work with a coach, to have that space for reflectiveness and thoughtfulness, as opposed to kind of toughing it out, going it alone, and possibly making more mistakes than you'd want. I think I think in many organizations we are starved for feedback. I think that there's a lot of buzz right now in the world of human resources and organizational development about how everybody hates performance appraisals, and lots of organizations are doing away with performance appraisals. I have very healthy skepticism about performance appraisals as a tool for professional growth, and so I think that But that doesn't mean that people don't want feedback. They just want feedback within the right safe environment. They want to be able to have to get feedback in an environment where they can really process it, sit with it, and make sense out of it, and not kind of feel like the feedback puts them on the defensive. So I think all leaders, I think, have that craving to know, how am I perceived? How am I doing? What could I be doing better? It's just a matter of finding the right tool that's going to yield that information for them. Does that answer the question, Maggie?
Yeah, I think that definitely answers the question. And maybe as a nice segue, earlier in your presentation, you talked a little bit about 360 assessments and that you've encountered some good ones and some not so good ones. Can you talk a little bit about what aspects of a 360 assessment make it most effective?
When you first started that question, I was thinking you were going to ask about what makes a bad 360. I got all excited because I love,
I'm sure we take that information as well.
Well, maybe let me just start with talking about a bad 360. And the reason I'm going to start talking about what a bad 360 looks like is because I have had probably a handful of experiences where I came in as the coach for someone who'd had a prior coaching experience that, for them at least, ended up disastrously. And when I drilled down with them to figure out what went wrong, a lot of it was connected to the type of 360 experience they had gone through. When organizations talk about 360s, there's a wide range of what people mean by that. And so for me, a problematic 360 is one that is just a sort of when a coach maybe just does sort of an open-ended interview with various people in the leader's work life, just elicits narrative feedback. There's not a rigorous specificity and behavioral focus to the inquiry, if that makes sense. It's informal, it's ad hoc, it's anecdotal. What I like about the tools that we use, and I've seen many reputable tools out there, so I'm not saying, but I'm only selling the ones from the Center for Creative Leadership. But what I like about them is the level of specificity, the level, you actually see specific behaviors, and you see how people in your immediate work environment perceive you related to a specific behavior. So let me just give you an example, and this is again from the 360 that we use, deals with problem of employees efficiently and directly, right? So that's a very specific, or confronts problem employees, specifically and directly when problems arise. It's a very specific, important leadership skill. We have to move in and address problem situations and not put our head in the sand. That's the kind of information I think that makes some 360s really strong. They're specific, they're behavioral, they're not just based on a more informal interview of people in their lives. I've worked with a couple coachees, folks who I was coaching, who really felt very hurt and wounded by the 360 experience they'd been through. It wasn't rigorous. It made them defensive. It didn't give them actionable things they could do, to improve their performance. It just made them feel criticized. And so I would say that's what you want to avoid. I think too, the other thing about effective 360s, I think if they can be made available to if they have an online mechanism, so that the people who are rating the executive can put in their information online, that just facilitates the ease of completing them. A lot of 360s take time to complete, and actually one of the challenges we have in our organization is because we do so many 360s a year, people get a certain amount of fatigue at always filling them out. The assessment instrument that we use has 120 items. I fill it out for a lot of people myself, and I can tell you to do it thoughtfully takes, it could take 20 minutes, even longer if you really have a lot of feedback for the person. But I think it's really worthwhile. It really demonstrates to someone who is interested in professional growth that the organization is deeply invested in them and in helping them to grow. Does that kind of answer the question, Maggie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lot of good advice for people who are seeking this type of tool or this type of assessment. Our next question that came in is, how effective is executive coaching for those who are maybe in career transition? Is executive coaching really geared towards people who are, currently in an organization and looking to grow within that organization, or can it be effective for others as well?
Right. Well, I think that, one thing we haven't really talked about today is just the general idea of career coaching. And I think people go to career coaches all the time, and that's very much when people are sort of questioning, am I doing the right job? Am I in the right job? Am I doing what I love? And am I doing the thing that maximizes my talents and my passions and all of that? And that's a career coach. That's someone who's going to help you make a decision about, where do you want to go next, regardless of the organization where you're currently working. I think that because executive coaching, when it's done well, is based on a sound, specific behavioral assessment, I think it's important that people have been in the organization for, I would say, at least a year, because otherwise the people who are going to be giving you feedback on your performance won't be familiar enough with who you are. I have been asked to be a rater for coworkers who were relatively new to the organization, say had only been there 6, 7, 8 months, and I actually have told people I can't complete the 360. I just don't know you well enough yet. So I think for executive coaching, which is based on an assessment, you really have to be with the organization for, I would say, at least a year. So you have enough people who know you. I think it's also possible in doing a 360 evaluation to to have people from organizations where you previously worked give you feedback, but it can't be too distant in the past because you want current information. You want it to be based on what it looks like right now for you.
I think that makes a lot of sense as well, so thank you for that answer. And then we've had a couple of questions come in that are similar to this one. People who are a little bit more senior in their career and feel that they have a lot to offer and are considering, moving into the field of executive coaching. Do you have any tips for getting started in the field, or good ways to sort of leverage your experience to move into executive coaching?
Let me just write this down. This is good. That's a great question. So if you've been in a field but not primarily trained as an executive coach, how would you make the transition into that field? First of all, I think folks that are coming from that kind of a background sometimes make the best executive coaches because they know what it's like to be under the stress that executives are under. They know what it's like to manage the complex operations of an organization, and so it's really a question of how do you build that level of meta awareness that where you can bring that wisdom to other people. Some of the things I did is to go through different leadership training programs that are available through different organizations. As I said, I went through a couple different programs at the Center for Creative Leadership. They have a certification program to be able to use their 360 evaluation, so I went through that. I also went through some of their leadership development training. I've gone through leadership development in other ways. I think what that helps folks to do is, in addition to understanding maybe a particular field of operations, it also helps you to sort of build that understanding about sort of the general idea of leadership at the executive level. One of the things that really has helped me as I've grown into this role is just to read voraciously, to just be reading constantly. I'm in a nice role in where I work. I oversee learning and organizational development in an organization, and so I actually bring in speakers to talk to our executives about leadership development, things like that. And so I can actually not only read about it, but I can also bring folks in. I think we're in this amazing era right now where we don't have to wait for people to come to us. We can just spend 50 hours drifting around in the TED universe, and watching different talks related to leadership, executive leadership, working within complex environments. I mean, I think that is also really powerful. I think the other thing that has been indispensable to me in terms of my growth as an executive coach is I have just networked with very widely and with a lot of depth with many consultants who do this kind of work, most of whom are much more senior than I am, and have been doing it for much longer than I have. And I get together with them, not infrequently, informally, to just talk with them about trends that they're observing, the kinds of stuff they're doing with their coachees. I find that actually to be invaluable, is to build a large, rich network of folks who do coaching, who do executive coaching. I'm approached a lot in my organization by people who want to get into executive coaching, and so just talking with people about what you do, how you do it, what you're reading, that's huge. What are you reading that is inspiring, that is relevant, that is high impact, not just to help you to maximize your own performance as a coach, but what kind of things you're going to give to the people you're coaching to read. I mean, I'm always giving the people that I coach stuff to read. They don't always like it because it's like I'm always giving them homework, and who wants homework? But I don't know how else people can grow in their self-awareness and their understanding of how organizations work. Do you think that got at the question, Maggie?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for that response. And If anyone has any further questions, please do feel free to submit them at this time using your questions box on the bottom of your dashboard. Otherwise, Wayne, I think this has been really great, and we're so thankful to you today for coming and giving this presentation for us. If there's anything else you'd like to kind of say to wrap up, please feel free. Otherwise, I'll let everybody know what they can expect for follow-up.
Great, thank you very much, Maggie. This has been just a blast to kind of put together and share what I know about executive coaching, to hear the questions folks have. Two things I would just offer to folks. I plan to participate in the ongoing discussion that occurs on LinkedIn about mentoring. And if folks have specific questions about anything I've talked about, even specific books that I've read that I've referred to, you want more information, on the screen you've got in front of you now, you can see my email address. I'm happy to respond to emails. And I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today.
All right, terrific. So we have a few follow-up questions here. As Wayne mentioned, please do feel free to email him. He's very kindly shared his email address. Otherwise, we can also send those over to Wayne following the presentation to get his thoughts on some of these follow-up questions that we're receiving. So many thanks again to everyone for joining us for today's presentation, and a very special thank you to Wayne. As a reminder, please do watch your email for a link to the recording of today's presentation, along with a follow-up survey and more information about our follow-up discussion on LinkedIn. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Alumni Career Webinar.